French president used a televised address to say we're moving into a new era where Europe needs to better defend itself. Emmanuel Macron says nuclear deterrence is essential for the continent.
I want to believe that the US will stand by our side, but we have to be ready for that not to be the case. Whether we reach peace in Ukraine soon or not, we need to be able to recognise the Russian threat.
Meanwhile, the US has also stopped sharing intelligence to Ukraine. Women who may have been victims of a Chinese PhD student convicted of rape are being urged to come forward. 28-year-old Zhen Hao Zhu filmed the abuse of 10 women in the UK and China between 2019 and 2023. A child died and another has been injured after a car was driven onto a sports pitch at Kendal Rugby Club in Cumbria this afternoon. A man's been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. President Donald Trump's granted a 1-month exemption on his new tariffs on imports from Mexico and Canada for US car makers. It's over fears the trade war could harm American manufacturers. And England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will make a joint bid to host a 2035 Women's World Cup. FIFA will make a decision next year. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 3 points at 87.55. The pound buys $1.28 and €1.19. LBC weather: outbreaks of rain for northwest Scotland, dry elsewhere tonight and a low of 0. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 8:02. Welcome to Wednesday's edition of Cross Question. On the panel with me, making her debut on the programme, next to me to my left, Natalie Fleet, who's Labour MP for Bolsover. She's not the beast of Bolsover, but I think we've got to come up with a new nickname for you over the course of the next hour, Natalie, or have you got one already? Next, Natalie, is Dr. Tessa Dunlop, historian, author and broadcaster, who is the co-host of the new Global podcast, Where Politics Meets History. Who would be your co-host, Dr. Tessa Dunlop?
You could frame it, who would be my dream co-host versus who is going to really be my co-host.
Thank you very much. To my right, Dame Tracey Crouch, former Conservative MP and Minister, who's now the Managing Director of the sports-focused public relations agency Hanover Communications. That's an inaccurate description, isn't it, actually? Because you're Managing Director of part of Hanover Communications.
Yeah, I'm Managing Director of Hanover Sport.
Yes.
Within Hanover Communications.
Exactly. And James Heale is the future editor of The Spectator. He is, at the moment, a mere political correspondent, but there is a vacancy for political editor, and we will be quizzing him on whether he's applying.
Oh, God.
This look of terror on his face. But we want to hear from you, 0345 6060 973. So much in the news to talk about, as you know, this week. And you can WhatsApp us on that number, and you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's kick off with a question from Scott in West Hampstead. By cutting off military aid and intelligence information to Ukraine, is President Trump being even-handed in the way that he's dealing with Russia and Ukraine? Or is he playing right into Putin's hands and allowing Russia to be rewarded for its illegal invasion of and war against Ukraine? Tessa.
I was explaining to Tracey just before we came on air that sometimes in the last week I felt so angry about what's happening. I've sort of felt like I'm in a room without a door, and I am not sitting in the east of Europe with missiles raining down on me, against which we now apparently aren't going to be supplying our allies with intelligence if it comes from America. We have entered the most scary parallel universe. It was anathema to me why several men on the right of British politics, I'll just name one of them, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, thought that it was safe.
Your very good friend.
Yeah, not anymore. I mean, I don't mind him off air, but honestly, it's bonkers, some of the stuff he comes out with. Out there backing Trump when actually we knew the writing was on the wall in terms of Trump backing America into an isolationist corner. None of us imagined it would happen as fast as it's happening. This is costing lives in real time at the moment on Ukrainian soil, and it's wicked the way those two pontificate in the Oval Office about, this terrible war, blaming Zelensky for killing his men, when actually what they're doing is dicing with death as we speak right now. It's deeply immoral, and it's also unless Donald Trump is a sort of Putin's stooge. It doesn't make any sense. He's negotiating with his ally, publicly and clumsily. He's meant to be negotiating with the enemy. He's blown all his negotiating cards with the enemy, and instead he's sort of crushing his ally. It is almost impossible, even for the top end of sort of armchair generals, to make sense of this. It makes no sense. And it's lucky we've got someone as sort of bureaucratic and even-handed as Keir Starmer at the top trying to make sense of it. He's like the ultimate sort of agony aunt, isn't he, between them all? Because if it was anybody with a bit of hot blood, I mean, you'd have lamped him, wouldn't you, by now? Also, Keir Starmer's a bit small to lamp Trump, but, you know. Anyway, hi.
Glad you got that off your chest. Natalie Fleet.
I'm a big believer in democracy, and we can't only like democracy when it gives us the results that we want. So what we have is an American president who changes his mind, who says things that we don't expect him to say, and sometimes things happen, like they did on Friday, that we wish didn't happen and make us uncomfortable to see. We have a really close relationship with the USA, and we have to continue that. That is so important, and that's why I have been really proud to see the Prime Minister doing everything he can to maintain that incredibly important relationship with the US, and also putting his arms literally and metaphorically around Zelensky. We have to find a solution here. We need to make sure that Ukraine has strength
is
to
Donald
get
Trump
peace.
being even-handed in the way... I mean, he's trying to portray himself as the man that can bring about peace. Now, traditionally, that would mean he was mediating, but it's quite difficult when he's criticising one party and not the other.
Can you remember the campaign slogan of Donald Trump's that said, "Vote for me, I will be even-handed"? You can't, because it didn't say it. Instead, he has a mandate to make America great again, and that's what he believes he is doing, and we have to work with the reality that we have.
But they're also the lead member of NATO, and NATO has committed itself to be Ukraine's ally. Currently, there's £1 billion worth of American munitions somewhere between Ohio and the Ukrainian border, which cannot be used. There are Shadow missiles in Ukraine, which now cannot be fired accurately because they've blocked intelligence. And we talk about our special relationship. So much for that special relationship. I mean, I do think John Healey's I'm impressed by him so far as a defence minister. I tell you what, I hope he's got some magic powder with him. He's over there at the moment, isn't he? Going over there, trying to sort it out.
They are, I feel like Keir Starmer, as you've already said, really calm and absolutely got this. We are being an honest broker between the parties and making sure that constituents like mine in Bolsover genuinely feel like politics doesn't matter to them. They feel like they've been let down by the political elite and that we're really removed from their lives. What happens in Ukraine and happens in America directly affects my constituents. We all need a deal, including the people that you're really concerned about in Ukraine that are facing the worst atrocities.
James Heale.
Well, no, I don't think he is being even-handed. And in one sense, that's partly a result of the position, which is that we have the ones the West is providing a lot of aid to Ukraine. And I suppose from the MAGA mindset, they're saying, well, we can exercise some influence directly over Ukraine and therefore, we actually have some leverage with them. But I think that's a misreading of the situation. I think that it also assumes that Russia are going to be an honest broker when it comes to these negotiations, which, if you look at Putin's word over the past 15 years, he's repeatedly broken in his actions. I think that what the most charitable reading perhaps of what Trump's trying to do here is talk about sort of game of great powers, spheres of influence, having sort of the US versus China and to a lesser extent Russia. And I think perhaps they're trying to sort of peel away Russia from the sort of China sphere. But I think that is going to not happen, because I think that what happened in the 70s when the Nixon tried the same thing, there was much more of an even power status. Right now, Russia is a much poorer, more of a client-state relationship with China. And I think it's a misreading. And actually, my only point would be, Donald Trump has never been a friend of Volodymyr Zelensky. You can look back to 2019, when he was putting pressure on Zelensky to sort of help him on the Hunter Biden story, and Zelensky didn't. I think there's always been that sort of sense of Ukraine being an itch ever since then. And I also think, frankly, he's just largely indifferent. It doesn't feature largely in his worldview. So I don't think he's being particularly even-handed. I don't think he's playing the situation well. And I would also just point out that one of the reasons for America's great prosperity of the past 80 years was its alliances and being seen as someone who was dependable, was able to someone who relied on for markets and democracy. And I think that I would just step back for a second, because obviously we're very concerned about Ukraine, but I was recently in Canada and looking looking at how the polls have changed dramatically thanks to the tariffs which he's imposing on Canada, I think he's pretty indifferent and sceptical about alliances which he sees as weaknesses. So I'd say that, Ukraine is just part of Donald Trump's worldview, which I don't think is particularly helpful or conducive to American interests.
And also, if you look back at history, America has often been an isolationist country. It's really only since the Second World War that it hasn't taken on that role.
That's a great point, and I think that we are much more instinctively in this country aligned with Ukraine for two reasons. One of which is it's in our sphere of influence, phrase, it's Europe. But second of all, we've always stood up for sort of the underdog, is that sense of the Sudetenland, of Czechoslovakia, of Poland once again.
So we didn't stand up for them then, did we?
Well, we did
Poland.
And then the end of the war for most of Eastern Europe didn't come until 1989. So it was kind of on our terms that we celebrate our successes of the Second World War.
Well, of course, but my point is that we have much more of the sense of empathy, and you can look at that through polling, through our political elite, which we saw in Westminster today in PMQs, unlike in America, where I think there's much more of that sort of isolationist sentiment which Iain talks about there, and also their worldview. It's much more about the Indo-Pacific, which we don't talk so much about here.
Tracey?
Well, I think the news is very worrying. And, I think that we're all sitting here desperate to see peace in Ukraine. It's just, how does it come about? And, I share concerns. I don't lie awake like you've been like you were saying outside, but it is really worrying. And what was really interesting is going to the pub after the scenes last week in the White House, and people genuinely very concerned about what this meant for the world. And we all want to make sure that we can support Ukraine. We want to make sure that they're getting peace on their terms. But how do we do that? And I have to say, I've been very impressed with the Prime Minister and how he handled last week. And I echo the words of my former colleagues, James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat, when they talk about his diplomacy, his stature in these discussions and the way he's behaved. And I think if we can continue in that direction, then I think we can play a really important part in this.
I agree. I think Keir Starmer had his week last week. But what concerns me is this idea, we've kind of cooked up the idea of peace. And the problem is with peace, even with a security backstop, even with a minerals deal, what that gives is it gives Russia time to double down, to arm up, and to wait until there's another blip in the alliance, and then to punch back through, and everything since time immemorial. You just need to ask anyone in Eastern Europe. I mean, I know particularly about Romania 5 times, Russia's landed in their backyard. Hello, boys. So is it next year? Is it the year after? And so I am instinctively very worried.
So why is it that Donald Trump can't see this?
Because he doesn't want to see it, as James pointed out. It's not his sphere of influence. You're quite right, harking back to the Founding Fathers. They said we don't want the rules-based system from the get-go. And actually the last 80 years have been the aberration, the blip, if you like. And it's because isolationism became a very dirty word after we saw what Nazism really meant. And that meant that and also it worked for the Americans. In this free democratic world, you're quite right, James.
But it's very
untrammeled trade led by them. They were the Palmerston gunboats of the peace era post-45. I
was going to say, I think it's very interesting how we've seen a reaction, though, to Trump's comments and behaviours, and the opinion polls are showing that he is beginning to completely freefall now.
In America?
All over the place, right?
But
there's been a lot
of...
What
he cares about is America.
Yeah, well, certainly here. I mean... But
he doesn't care, does he? He cares about America. He cares about his blue belt.
It goes back to the point that Natalie was making about democracy, but I think people are beginning to see exactly what they've got, and quite quickly. I too have lots of Canadian friends, and the impacts on the tariffs and driving great concern as to what does this mean for the future of their company.
They are furious, and to get Canadian to be furious is quite something.
Did you call it Canada?
No, I said to get a Canadian to be furious. Did you see the Canadian Foreign Minister on Newsnight last night? She was incandescent.
But I mean, it is extraordinary, but it's also driving sort of kind of consensus within Canada about how they deal with this, because the one thing that they don't want to happen to them is to be driven to such an extent that they literally have no choice but to end up being, annexed to America.
It's okay, the King was wearing his honorary Canadian uniform.
That's fine.
For the first time ever, Canada is going to lean into King Charles. Anything's better than Trump.
I mean, that's the thing, is in January, Pierre Poilievre, who's the Canadian Conservative leader, was ahead by 25 points, sort of Keir Starmer levels before the last election. And now it's neck and neck. And this is the whole point. I think a lot of people on the right of British politics are now breaking with Donald Trump because they can see the fact that he's toxic to their voters. Before, I think, 2 weeks ago, Reform UK voters were broadly, I think, about plus 30 in favour for Donald Trump. Now they're -8 against. And that, I think, shows that Donald Trump, for much as many people will be looking to him for sort of lessons and stories about strategies, etc., overall, it is make America great again. It's not make conservatism great again. It's not making different countries great again. And that's why I think it's quite striking. The past 72 hours, we've seen so many people like Kerry Badenoch and Robert Jenrick put distance between him and their parties.
Have the Canadian Liberal Party elected a new leader yet?
No, that's this Sunday. It's going to be Mark Carney, probably.
Yeah, he's so... Am I allowed to say that? He's one of my little crushes. I know that over a certain age one isn't allowed such things.
Now, Tessa.
Sorry. He's head of the Bank of England.
You can't say shallow things in the week before our podcast starts because people might get the wrong idea that it's not as serious.
He's a married man, father of 4, ran the Bank of England. But still, for an older bloke, he ain't half bad. That's all I'm saying. And he was also very angry one night on Newsnight.
Well, it's great. I mean, he's been the sort of resurrection of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, he has been.
Well, on that bombshell, let's take a break and we'll come back to more questions for our panel in just a moment. If you'd like to ask one, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:15.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on Global Player. This is LBC.
Story, Del Piero.
17 minutes past 8. My friend Brenda, who's Canadian, says, I'm with Tessa on that, on a text just now.
Is that Mark Carney?
Yeah.
Are we allowed to say
That's what we've been talking about in the break, ladies and gentlemen.
Absolutely.
Right, let's move on to a serious question from John in Hammersmith. John, very good evening. What would you like to ask?
Evening. If Mr. Zelensky signs a $40 trillion rare earth deal with the United States, what is the consequence to the relationship between the United States and Russia? Because the last time somebody tried to take a cheeseburger off President Trump's plate, it didn't end well.
James.
Well, currently there are talks between the US and Russia going on, in terms of relaxing some of those sanctions that have been applied since 2022. So I think that this is only one part of a bigger picture. I understand, of course, the point about commercial concerns, and you look at the past 100 years of diplomacy, commercial concerns have been a thing which has obviously worked to deter war. Famously, it was once said that no two countries of the McDonald's have ever been to war with each other. But I do think that...
Is that right?
Yeah, it was true. The whole point being about sort of liberal democracy, Fukuyama, post-1990, no two countries go to war with each other. I think Russia and Ukraine have probably stretched that maxim to the limit. But I think that when it comes to the minerals deal, I think it's broadly regarded by the security establishment as being insufficient in itself. Yes, it's a key thing to have economic interest in a country. You're more likely to go in and defend that country if there are those things there. But of course, remember the EU has had a deal with minerals with Ukraine over the past 4 or 5 years. So I don't think a minerals deal in and of itself will be sufficient, and that actually, as Tessa was saying beforehand, I mean, if it gives time to Russia to restock and rearm 5 years down the line, you'd think that they'd learn the lessons from this conflict and go in harder, and I'm not sure there's not a US security guarantee there'll be enough to deter them from future action again.
Tracey.
I think whatever happens, we need to stop thinking in very short-term sort of kind of lens and actually think about these things from a long-term perspective as well. There has to be an immediacy in trying to, repair relations. Obviously something has to be done from a diplomacy perspective to rebuild, what happened last week. But we have to have this long-term global security aspect as well. I don't know enough about the minerals deal to have some kind of deep, meaningful commentary on whether or not it's the right thing or the wrong thing. And, obviously Zelensky's much closer and, will make those decisions. But I just think we have to always think about what does this look like in 5 years' time.
Natalie.
The reason I'm really proud of the work that the Prime Minister's been doing is that he's saying that Zelensky and the Ukrainians that he represents have to be at the heart of anything that's agreed, and that is incredibly important. I have been so impressed with Zelensky, the way that he, the apology that he gave, just the tone, the way he's conducted himself. And I think that if he signs the deal, it will be because he believes it's the right thing to do for Ukraine.
I disagree, I'm afraid. I think it all went horribly wrong on Friday because instinctively he doesn't believe it's the right thing for Ukraine, but he's had to capitulate because actually if you suddenly lose American munitions and American intelligence, that pretty quickly drives home a re-decision or a 180-degree U-turn. I feel very sorry for Volodymyr Zelensky because what's happening is on the east end of his country it's being carved up by Russia, and in the west end it's going to be carved up by America, and quite what's left in the middle for the Ukrainians to fight over.
But the bizarre thing is that apparently all these rare minerals are in the Donbass, which is controlled by Russia.
That is going to be something of a challenge, but one's going to presume that actually two things. One is that they're not going to be drilling those minerals first. But secondly, and I think this is again where, I adore Volodymyr Zelensky. We all want a little doll of Volodymyr Zelensky on our mantelpiece at the moment, or I feel we should.
Along with Mark Carney.
Indeed. Anyway, I blush.
More of this on the podcast
I'm
next
slightly
week.
distracted. You've knocked my train of thought. Where was I, Mark? I can't remember. Vladimir, where I thought he misplayed it was, it's about mood music and performance for Trump. And frankly, it doesn't matter whether he's digging a lump of coal out of Ukraine. He needs to be able to sell it and look like he's won a deal in front of his American audience. And Zelensky should have read the room better there. I understand why he didn't. It was a second language. It's huge pressure. But clearly, it was a circus, a media circus for Vladimir to sort of go, yes, wonderful. Thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity to be a sort of industrial partner with you. And he didn't read that right.
But I think Zelensky will be alive to the fact that, on the one hand, he's dealing with this very immediate solution, but on the other hand, he has to keep his eye on the longer term, issues. He's an exceptionally smart leader who has navigated his country through some really challenging times. I don't think he is anyone's fool. I think they all could have played it slightly better last week, and there were some really good sort of kind of cutaways to like the Ukrainian ambassador just sort of kind of head in hands, and there's those sort of kind of things. But I think that he will be looking at this potential minerals deal not as a short-term solution, but something that is part of the long term as well.
And you've got to remember that the time pressure on this has all come from Donald Trump. He was the one who said, campaign electing, I can get this war solved in 24 hours. He was the one who sort of pushed these talks. It doesn't have to be negotiations conducted in this tenor, in this sort of time frame, etc. He's like, we need to get a deal done, we need to get a deal done. It's not sort of Brexit and sort of 31st of October. This war, which obviously can't go on forever, but had a much different time frame until Donald Trump got elected and stressed the immediacy of the deal. So I think that needs to be brought to bear. And if we want to put Ukraine in the strongest negotiation position, which has been the UK's position up till now, obviously I think reminding Donald Trump sometimes at that point is perhaps a useful point to make.
The irony is, right now on their front line, actually they're better positioned than they were, the Ukrainians, than they were even 3 or 4 months ago. That's what's so pitiful about this. And also they've had some brilliant strategies, punching a hole into North Russia so that they had something to bring to the table. I just feel what Trump's done is like a great big elephant, isn't he? Just trampling on bits of Lego. It's just gross.
But isn't it interesting though that we're sat here, in London with so many different issues going on in this country, and yet all we're talking about is Trump and his behaviours. And I can see Ian's screen, I have to benefit that, and all the listeners are asking about America and what this means on,
Well, I reckon since Trump's inauguration, on 75% of the days since then, we have led this programme talking about Trump, and there is part of me that feels we're falling into his trap by doing this. But how can you ignore it?
But we fall into our own trap because we've delegated away our military capacity. Yeah. I say us as Europeans since 1945, and this is where we've ended up. So that tonight, when the UK gets American intelligence, apparently they're not going to be able to share it with Ukraine. That's insane. They're meant to be our closest partners.
And looking on the screen on there, I can see one of the top headlines was Macron to increase French military spending by 20%. The argument which Trump would put would be, hang on a sec, do you remember those Germans laughing at him in the United Nations in 2018? One of those was the chairman of the Munich Security Conference last month, who broke down into tears after J.D. Vance's speech on the closing day. The Europeans, he would argue, have not learned. We have not learned. We've been far too slow to rearm. Military spending has ticked along at sort of 2.3%. That is nothing compared to what it ought to be. And so I do think, as much as I sort of, regret Donald Trump's actions and think what he's done is wrong, we also clearly should have rearmed much faster. We haven't done so yesterday. We should do so today and tomorrow and keep on getting better. If we want to put ourselves in a stronger position in order to stand up to his actions and be a world power that we claim to sit around in studios and talk about.
So that we're not then buffeted by the vagaries of the American electorate's decision. I mean, heaven forbid if you talk to the average man in Ohio. Sorry, but somebody had to say it.
Iain, could you remind us how we tune into your podcast, please?
Are you reading Susan in Margate's question?
I always read people's
Susan
comments
in
from
Margate,
Kent.
Sorry, let me put my glasses on because I wasn't expecting to read that out. No. She says, this is not for your panel, but can you just give a shout out at some point to this in your evening show on how I get the podcast and what time it is and what day it is? And then she goes on to ask a question that we could answer. I'm not sure how familiar you are with podcasts, Susan, because they're not at a particular time. We do release it at 1:00 in the morning on Tuesday morning. So that will be the first episode. So you have to go to a podcast provider, look up Global Player. There are others.
I feel you've lost Susan now.
Global Player, if you need to have a smartphone, or you can just listen to it on your laptop.
A computer?
Yeah.
Yeah, even my mum can manage it, and she's 84.
All right then. So, Susan, email me privately if you have difficulties. Right, let's go to Anthony in Marylebone, who says, why is the government so reluctant to raise taxes on the rich to fund defence rather than automatically take it from the less well-off by cutting welfare? Well, they haven't, to be fair, haven't actually said they're going to do that, but given the welfare budget is by far and away the biggest budget in government, it's likely to happen, given that they've already raised the overseas aid budget. Natalie, where do you stand on that?
We have just been elected. I took the seat from a Conservative, and we were elected in a landslide victory that was bigger than we expected.
On 33% of the vote.
And the reason that happened is because people felt that there was absolute chaos, everything was broken, nothing was working, and they wanted stability, and they wanted people to, they wanted change, they wanted things to get better, but they also wanted to know that we'd be really sound with their finances. They wanted to know, they said to me, Duck, it's all right, I've been Labour all my life and I want to vote for you again. You're not going to bankrupt us, are you? You're not going to take all my money and leave us without anything. We had to prove really strongly that we could be trusted with their finances. So now we're faced with a lot of really difficult decisions, and one of them is how we increase the defence budget. We have increased it, and I think that a lot of my constituents are happy about that. They want to give overseas aid if there is money available, but they see that when things are as tight as they are and as difficult as they are, then we should be prioritising making sure that we're safe at home. In terms of benefits specifically, before I entered Parliament, I helped people claim benefits. Before I was made redundant, I saw some absolute poverty and destitution that breaks my heart when I think about it. That is a life that some people have to live, and most people don't want to. So what we've done instead, and I am so happy about this, £22 billion in the NHS. You're not on benefits because you're sat on an NHS waiting list anymore. We're making sure that people can work. We're getting them to job centres, and when they get there, they're not punitive, they're supportive. It's the dread that fills you when you have to walk into that job centre, and I have lived this, and so many of my constituents have too. You want them to be supportive and have time for you when you get there, and then we're making sure that when they do have jobs, they're good, secure jobs with proper workers' rights.
But if you're not going to take it out of the welfare budget, why don't you do what Anthony suggests and tax rich people?
I don't know where we're going to take it from. I don't know what we're going to do. What we do have, and I think it's worth a definite shout out, is the first woman Chancellor that's going to make these decisions.
What do you think should happen?
I think that we need to have enough money in defence, and I am really pleased that we finally increased defence spending to the highest since the Cold War, and we'll see what comes next.
Okay, James?
I mean, the welfare budget is going to, unfortunately, by the end of this Parliament, be able to control 100 billion by 2029 on current trends. I think the defence budget was 57 billion last year. Any government, no matter how compassionate, no matter what complexion, would struggle to find the financing for that. And I think that, obviously, Labour are going to be now talking about it, looking at it, how ways you can get the welfare bill down to what it was before COVID. But unfortunately, in this country, we've got some really tough choices. And frankly, the post-Cold War peace dividend is now going to turn into a peace penalty, whereby we've got to rearm very quickly in this world that we're in. And does the government have the stomach for the fights ahead? I think it's going to be buffeted from rock to rock. And I think that the Labour Party will be put through some difficult votes, even despite their fantastically impressive majority. So I think that the reason why we haven't, to go back to the original question on spending, is frankly two reasons. One of which is, will the bond markets wear it? And we saw a few months ago at the beginning of the year how I think some of the market speculation about Rachel Reeves and then sort of the Treasury figures, and I'll be interested to see what happens at the end of this month when the OBR forecasts come out. And second of all is also about the rich can leave. You know, the rich are frankly fairly mobile, and I think the non-DOMS rate is not going to raise as much money as Labour thought it would before the election. So for all those reasons, facing the big bills we've got coming down the line and looking at the way in which the rich can leave, that's why we don't tax the rich more. And frankly, the rich are, I think, taxed at pretty high levels compared to back in 2010.
Tessa?
Well, it's interesting because there's been so much jiggery-pokery, a bit like Donald Trump tying himself in knots because he said, I'm going to end this war in one day. I think that the Labour Party, by saying we are not going to increase income tax on national insurance, set themselves this giant trap, given the financial chalice, poisonous chalice, that they knew they were going to inherit. And we saw really a damp squid budget. I know you like the fact she's a woman, and I'm all for a woman in number 11, although I don't understand what difference it makes whether, you know, which appendage you have when you're making decisions about the budget. But it wasn't a great budget, was it? Partly because she slammed a whole bunch of taxes on businesses, the national insurance tax. And actually, it would just be so much more straightforward. And here's Keir Starmer's chance to do it in this last week. World situation has changed. Actually, we need to seriously rethink security in Europe for our future. And I'm going to say, I didn't anticipate it. No one did, not even Zelensky. And we're going to put a penny on income tax for those earning, say, above £35,000. Because I was just having a look at you, Iain, for example, before I went on air. Those orange glasses, you could have got them in black and paid the extra on the, you know, and a penny on income tax. James Heale's tie, probably silk. You could have got it in acrylic. You've got fake nails, and Natalie, they're lovely, but they cost you, what, 20 quid? I mean, there's lots of little things that all of us...
I've escaped from this.
Yeah, you do look a bit shoddy, but I mean, under the desk, something might be going on, Tracey.
Brutal.
But my point is that everybody on a...
podcast with
I'm going to have to tune in.
I think you will.
Yeah. But the point is, all of us, in the squeeze middle, you know, all of us could just pull in that belt by one.
Tracy, would you like to respond to that?
I have nothing I can say. No, look, the only thing I say, and I sound like some wise old woman, which I'm not really, but, you know, when we came in 2010, you know, we had difficult decisions that we had to take as a new government. And, you know, the Labour Party now finds itself in government with these challenges that we had back, you know, 14, 15 years ago. And it is hard. One of the things that I would say is, first of all, the Labour Party inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7. And that first budget sort of kind of wiped that growth out. And many of these issues, if growth had continued, would be financing themselves. And that's the challenge. One of the things that I always find a little bit frustrating, especially now that I'm out, is that I used to get a lot of heat for some of the decisions that we used to take as a government, particularly around welfare reform. And now the Labour Party is doing exactly the same thing that we were criticised as being evil Tories for. And I just sit there and think, it's you just have to understand that governing is a very hard thing to do, and you have to take difficult decisions. You have to make priorities. Some of those priority decisions are really uncomfortable.
But why can't we just put a penny on income tax?
It doesn't work.
Because it's a Liberal Democrat policy, and the Labour Party and Conservative Party don't adopt Liberal Democrat policies. And I'm very disappointed, Tracey, that you didn't respond to Tessa and say, well, that dress that you've got from Laura Ashley, you could have got it at Primark. Oh, she did.
It's Primark.
She did. It's 8:34 on LBC News Headlines with Darryl Jackson.
The French president's warned the world must be ready if the US chooses not to be on the same side when it comes to Ukraine's war with Russia. It was confirmed earlier the US has also suspended intelligence sharing with Ukraine. A child's died and another's injured after a car was driven onto a sports pitch in Cumbria. A man in his 40s has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. And it's feared as many as 50 or more women could have been targeted by a Chinese PhD student convicted of rape. 28-year-old Zhenhao Zhou filmed his abuse of 10 women in London and China between 2019 and 2023. LBC weather, England and Wales staying dry tonight. Outbreaks of rain for northwest Scotland and a low of 0.
This is LBC.
Hey, how
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:37, let's reintroduce our panel. Dame Tracey Crouch, former Conservative MP, Natalie Fleet, Labour MP for Bolsover, James Heale, political correspondent for The Spectator, soon to be political editor, possibly, and Dr. Tessa Dunlop, who is up until today, was going to be the co-host of the Where Politics Meets History podcast.
Sorry to be fired.
I'm now thinking, oh my God, what have I let myself in for? John is in Reading. Hello, John.
Evening, Ian. Hi, evening panel. Always nice speaking to you, mate. Right, I've got another question for you. So, question for today is, do we see a future in which the Canadians, the UK and Mexico start their own independent European Union trading bloc? So, for example, actually excluding the Americans.
The answer to that question is no, but let's go around that panel. Tracey?
No. I mean, one of the challenges about the way that Trump is behaving is that actually we are in a global economy and we should be in a global economy. We should have this free flow. Trading blocks, I think, serve a limited purpose, but we are close allies, friends with Canada. If we can do more to support them. As we've already been pointing out, the King's been wearing his special uniform. And actually, your Canadian friends, our Canadian friends, would be talking about how they've responded, in Canada with the whole Buy Canada and,
I found
US
myself
goods being
lingering
taken
around
off.
the maple syrup tonight in the co-op aisle until I discovered it didn't actually come from Canada.
Also, for those of us that are diabetic, talking about maple syrup is like, teas. It's very high in sugar, not allowed it anymore.
No. Golden syrup's okay, though.
Oh, interesting.
No, it isn't. But...
Oh. Yeah, I believe you.
But maybe this will encourage the Canadians to start a proper free trade agreement with the UK, because they've been rather sniffy about it so far.
Well, I mean, maybe. And actually, I think we've certainly still seen conversations that we want to see a US-UK trade deal done. And the fact that the Prime Minister has said that those negotiations are open, I think is really important. But, I'm very much believe in sort of kind of global economy and as making that as smooth as possible.
Natalie?
Absolutely not. We're not having a trade-in bloc. My constituents voted 70% to come out of the last one. They're not in a rush to go into any other. How did I vote? I voted and campaigned for Remain, and then very quickly realised that we've got to look after the people that had felt really strongly the other way. And I think the reason that they felt like that, I didn't expect Brexit to come up, but I think that they felt like they'd been hard done to. I feel like they felt like living standards were getting poorer, the school uniform was getting more expensive, and I think that now they're going to see their pay packets go up next month. We've got a triple lock that sees pensions go up. Businesses are seeing, business rates go down. We are investing in the economy.
National insurance going up.
People are... We've got to raise some money somewhere, and we're doing it as fairly as we possibly can. But ultimately, people are going to judge us on our legacy around how they feel at the end of this Parliament. They need to see more police on the streets. They need to see shorter waiting lists in the NHS and schools that are properly funded.
But do you really believe that Keir Starmer can do a trade deal with America under Trump?
I have never been as impressed as I have been this weekend. So it felt like the end of the world on Friday, and then all of a sudden you've got Keir Starmer that arrives and he's like, I'll get on the phone to Trump, I'll get on the phone to Trump again, I'll put my arm around Zelensky, I'll walk down Downing Street to greet him, and then I will host leaders from countries that are all our allies. He says that Donald Trump is very open to a trade deal, and ultimately that's going to make people in Bolsover better off. I am here for it.
OK, James?
Well, look, obviously I'm a free trader, Spectator tradition, and I think that, there's clearly a vacancy in terms of world leadership right now, so why doesn't Keir Starmer step into that breach? I hope that, I think that the Canadians are hurting right now, and it would be a very good thing that, given the gesture shown to Volodymyr Zelensky over the past week, it'd be good if His Majesty's government was to send someone out there quite senior, perhaps David Lammy, for instance, to Canada to kind of reassure and send that message, even if you don't say specifically, we agree that what Donald Trump's doing on tariffs with Canada is mental. It's a good thing to actually send someone out there and sort of show the solidarity, because they're hurting right now. So I do think that relying on the traditional alliances is going to be a key point, and they're part of Five Eyes and they will be with us, and whoever is in charge, the Liberals or the Canadian Conservatives after the next election, that's an important thing to do.
I wonder if Five Eyes is about to become Four Eyes. Tessa?
It's fascinating, isn't it, how our little pocket-sized Prime Minister is like a sort of little wind-up gizmo. I mean, I find the way in which he's operating and the different nooks and crannies he's able to inhabit almost seamlessly. On the one hand, with his freebie specs, very expensive freebie specs, he is such the European bureaucrat. He just fits into the European mould. You can feel Europe breathe a sigh of relief around him. He just is one of them. Macron's at one with him. All those, coming and goings in Germany, either way, they're just going to work alongside wee Starmer. And then, remarkably enough, that bureaucratic skin is shed and he goes over and he's sort of become the new Trump whisperer. I suppose it's because he's quite small and unthreattery and sort of,
he's not that small.
He is. No, I'm so sorry. Did you see him and Zelensky hug? They're not tall men. Trump's a tall man. These things matter. It's all about power play. And I think Trump finds him kind of cute almost, and of course he loves all the British nostalgia, and he's got his businesses in Scotland and goodness knows where else. And so it's an easy vibe for Keir Starmer to lean into, but I'm just very surprised at how dexterously he's able to play it. And of course, when I think about it, the reason is the stage was set because of Brexit, and it's the first time as a passionate Remainer, and actually Iain and I fell out over Brexit. We didn't talk for 4 years. It was him mainly, because it's always men.
No, you said something horrible about me on Twitter, and I took great exception to it.
It's quite thin-skinned.
You called me shoddy.
Did I?
Save it for the podcast.
Okay. Anyway, so going back, so what Brexit's done is it's given Starmer this sort of magic platform to game his relationship with Trump at the same time as the Europeans are thinking, thank God all the Brexit madness is over. And I do think it's that since 2016, this is the best I've felt in terms about being British. Because there is don't we all have a weird national vanity where for some of it was emboldened by Brexit, and for some of us it's diminished by Brexit. I mean, some people I know went to a counsellor because of Brexit, and I actually feel that I'm rebuilding my Britishness over the last couple of weeks because we're straddling these two continents. It's brilliant.
How tall do you think Keir Starmer is?
I think Keir Starmer
feet and inches.
Well, my brother's 5 foot. My brother's 6'5". He's a big man, 6'5", and he couldn't get over how wee Starmer was, as he said. And I think he must therefore be about 5'6", max 5'7".
No, I can tell you, he's 5'8".
Yeah, because I've just looked it up.
He's also the same height as me.
Okay, but that's not...
Be careful.
But no, for a woman, that's a reasonable height. But I would say for just hanging around Donald Trump, who's over 6 foot, does anyone want to Google that for me?
The gravitas and the statesmanship is impressive.
I think, look, speaking as an average man myself, 5'10",
about 2 inches taller than Stum. There's a lot in 2 inches.
Well, I have something over the Prime Minister. All I'd say is I think we shouldn't overstate it. Look, we've already talked at length on this programme about how Donald Trump doesn't particularly value alliances, but in his first term, the Shinzo Abe relationship, the Japanese Prime Minister was something that he seemed to get along with. He was someone he respected. I think he was someone who was seen as, able to sort of be respectful and quiet, would have good conversations, constructive conversations in a sphere that influenced Donald Trump. Keir Starmer can now play the same role.
Unthreateningly.
And I think he's learned the lesson which the Labour Party didn't learn in the first term of Trump, which is that sometimes gestures matter more than words. So for all those European leaders coming out on Saturday morning and attacking Donald Trump by name, sometimes it's more like a gesture. If welcoming Volodymyr Zelensky is a better way of doing that than sending out a tweet about how terrible Donald Trump is.
I think it's always really important that we remember that all Prime Ministers have a moment where they do particularly well. It happens that Starmer, I think, did particularly well on this, but ultimately at the end of the day there are still businesses that are suffering because of the national insurance contribution rise. We've got farm tax, we've got all sorts of different issues that the country faces that are not being dealt with so very well. So I think he's got his moment in the sun.
But can we all just vicariously live off it a tiny bit? Because it's been thin pickings for the last 8 years for a lot of us. Thin gruel.
Well, you crack on, but there are farmers that are sort of kind of, very much sort of, wondering about the future of the farms. You've got businesses that are making redundancies or on, recruitment freezes and all sorts of things. So
on the ground, it's dismal.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just say, in terms of up and down success stories, look, for instance, I've when your podcast has Gillian talked about Liz Truss, wrote the Liz Truss book, and the one moment that Liz Truss really had in the limelight was when she, for instance, came out and backed the Ukrainians by declassifying intelligence on Russia when Putin was trying to establish a pretext for his war before the war began in February 2022. That was a success story under Truss, under Sunak, under Johnson. There was some ardent support for Ukraine. So I think that let's not just make it about party political issue, how wonderful Keir Starmer is. This is a great British success story helping Ukraine. And I think we ought to remember that, even though if we might think our country's taken a bit of a battering over the past 8 years.
If we could play Jerusalem now, we would.
Yeah.
8:47.
This is LBC. They Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
We have with us Dame Tracey Crouch, Natalie Fleet, James Heale and Dr. Tessa Dunlop. A text question from Barry in Basildon. Nearly 1 million immigrants can barely speak any English, if they can even manage that much. Why are there so many people living here who can't speak our language? What can be done to change this? Now, new data from the UK Statistics Authority, taken from the 2021 census, has revealed that just over 930,000 people living in England who were born overseas cannot speak English well or at all. Some 137,000 of those people can't speak English at all. We're going to be doing a phone-in on this after 9 o'clock, so we'll have time to talk about this in much more detail. Tessa.
It's interesting. Tomorrow I'm going to get my hair cut by a guy from Nicaragua. Does a good haircut and only 50 quid in London. That's good. That's a deal. And I don't think he speaks more than about 7 words, but it doesn't impair his ability to cut my hair. I show him a photo and it means I don't have to talk to him. I don't have to tell him where I'm going tonight. I just crack on with my work for that.
Yeah, but you do need to tell him what you want done to your hair.
Yeah, I can, but it doesn't need, there are, let's just be honest about this. A huge number of migrants, for better or for worse, are shoring up the bottom of our economy in many jobs that don't require huge amounts of verbal dexterity. I also want to flip the equation. I go spend a lot of time in Romania. I speak Romanian as a second language, and I'm not fluent. I sound coarse. I learnt it up in the north, and I have rough Romanian. Basically, I sound like a very different.
But you haven't emigrated there. I mean, surely if you emigrate to a country.
I spent a year there, and I still was rough. I was still struggling with all sorts of bits and bobs and saying the wrong thing and offending people. The point is, it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, you can offend people in English.
but it's very difficult to learn a language once you're an adult. Do you know that this is scientifically proven? The best age to start learning a second language. Have a guess. Let's do a straw poll. How did you know that?
Because I studied languages at university.
So if you're somebody who's come over here, you've been chased out of Syria, you've lost your place in Afghanistan because of a crazy American-led war, British-backed, and you arrive, forgive me, but without the best English, whose fault is that? Are we trying to blame or are we trying to look for the solution?
Well, let me flip that round. I remember a call years ago when I was doing a phone-in on, if you're an illegal immigrant, give me a call and tell me why you came here. And so this Afghani guy called, he said, I was 14 years old, 1999, I came on the bottom of a lorry from Calais. His English was now perfect, and he was employing 50 people in a local garage. Right. If he can learn English, why can't somebody else? Natalie?
I think this gets to a deeper question that's raised with me loads of times. It was in the top 3 issues, immigration was. I think that people feel like there is too much immigration in this country, and actually we saw net migration spiral out of control under the Conservative government, and Rishi Sunak made it his election pledge that he was going to stop the boats, and then failed. People saw the gimmick around Rwanda.
No, but let's stick on language.
On language...
Does it offend you if somebody in your constituency, even if they're not illegal, if they're a legal immigrant, does it offend you if they can't speak good English?
It doesn't happen. It's never happened to me.
What, nobody in Bolshe? What's it called?
Bolsover.
Bolsover. No one speaks English as a second language?
They might speak English as a second language, but they speak it really well. And I think
But didn't Jack Straw say, because he used to be the MP for Blackburn, and I'm sure that he brought this up like 20 years ago, saying that in a surgery, he finds it really offensive that people come in and they can't speak a word of English.
It just doesn't happen. So in my community...
Well, there are 1 million people who can't.
So let's talk about, because we're in London, I just need to explain where I come from. Me and my husband live a mile apart. When we were born a mile apart, we met at secondary school. You're local if your great-grandparents are in the cemetery. You don't move. I travel here and I feel very homesick.
It's the no migration.
If you then come into my community, there is an expectation that if you're from the next town or from Leicester, then you're like, oh, where are you from? You've got an accent. And that's just really strange. We're not used to it. If you came not speaking English, that would make us really uncomfortable, and we would just not understand why you couldn't speak English.
James.
Well, we've had a very hands-off relationship with integration in this country, and I think that's a generation of policymakers post-war, and we can talk about how we want to discuss that, but it's unsurprising, perhaps, when we don't impose many ways of putting burdens on people who have just arrived here or integrating. They're not surprised that they're not learning the language. I would obviously counter that by also saying on the left, of course, the argument would be that we're not funding enough services for people to learn English language later on in life. But, I mean, it's a whole relationship about our post-war multiculturalism. We generally were pretty happy being a hands-off relationship and letting people come to this country and speak the language they chose to. But obviously think it's a good thing to learn the world's greatest language, which is English, the language of Chaucer and Shakespeare, etc. So if people want to learn, I think obviously the UK government should sort of think of a way to do that, as well as obviously doing things like talking around issues about immigration and integration.
Tracey.
I represented Chatham for 14 years. We had...
Aylesford.
Actually, it's very specific. We had a very large migration of Eastern Europeans into the Chatham, into Medway towns, and the community integration was a challenge at first, and the school struggled because a significant number of children couldn't speak English as their first language, but there was significant effort by the authorities, by actually all of the agencies, to ensure that that integration did take place, and with that came those language learning opportunities, and the next generation were the ones that were coming through, almost teaching their parents to speak English as well. Nonetheless, it still annoys people when they walk through Chatham High Street and hear people speaking in their own language rather than in English. And some people do find that intimidating. So I do think that there's two things to this. Certainly when you're within your own group and you're talking whatever language, then that can be intimidating to other people. But learning English to be able to interact with agencies, with schools, with shops, with communities is also incredibly important.
I phoned up a hospital recently to query an appointment, and the first thing that the automated thing said was, if you would like to speak in English, press 1. I'm thinking, hang on, what country are we actually living in? I thought it was outrageous. It's outrageous. It was a London hospital. They don't have a Welsh facility in a London hospital. Anyway, I want to get to one final question before the fun question. It's from Kelly in Paddington. Britain wants to host the Women's World Cup and then maybe the Men's World Cup after that. Given there's so much corruption in FIFA, should we really be wasting our money like this? Now, all 4 home nations, football associations, are set to unite to bid to host the 2035 Women's World Cup, with Keir Starmer saying any bid would have the government's full support. The Times reports that should this bid be successful, then the 4 associations would then consider a bid to host the Men's World Cup in the late 2030s or early 2040s, when I'll probably be dead. I measure my life by the number of World Cups that I've still got to see.
That's really sad, Iain.
I know, Tracey.
I'm really excited about this, and I'm glad that the 4 FAs have come together.
Careful.
You'll remember that in 2019, the Tory manifesto, Boris's manifesto, had a bid for the 2030 Men's World Cup in it. Actually, quite soon after we resumed government, it became clear that we weren't ready to bid for the 2030 World Cup, and actually we were unlikely to win it anyway. So to bid for the Women's World Cup is fantastic, but actually it's going to be, to quote Donald Trump, it's going to be huge.
It's going to be a beautiful World Cup.
It's going to be a beautiful World Cup. It's going to be huge because actually the growth of women's football is extraordinary.
And is it more so in this country than others?
We have definitely professionalised it better than other countries.
If you look at Arsenal, I think, sold out a women's match recently at the Emirates, which you would know 5 years ago that would have been unthinkable.
I mean, it's massive, and I turned 50 this year, but 40.
No,
shame.
I love it. I can't wait. I go up a parkrun band age grade. I was going to be fantastic, but I was banned from playing football at school. And so, 40 years on, we're at a position where we could potentially be hosting Women's World Cup and actually encouraging and engaging the next generation.
OK, very short answers, please.
Well, obviously, Dick Her-Ladies was enormously popular in the 1920s, and it was a tragedy the FA banned it because it was so popular. I would just say on this, there's all sorts of corruption when it comes to foreign agencies, etc. It seems to be a relatively benign form of corruption in terms of FIFA, and jolly good luck to the men and women hosting the World Cups.
OK. Natalie?
I'm going to watch Chelsea versus somebody else they're playing against, and it's a
So
full
looking
90
forward to it,
minutes.
aren't you?
It's quite a long time, but my 11-year-old daughter will be so happy. I love this. I love the strides we're taking in women's football. The tickets are cheap and easy to get. I would like it if men's football was more like that too, because this is real special family time.
I'll take you to West Ham with me one day.
Is it 90 minutes?
Is that a threat or a promise?
I'm washing my
What did you just say?
Is that a threat or a promise? I'm feeling protective of Natalie.
Your short answer to this question, Tessa.
Well, I'm very relieved that we might be hosting the Women's World Cup in 2035, because it might mean that the president of the FA, Prince William, will be able to make the final. You'll recall that he wasn't able to travel to Australia when the Lionesses were
that's true, yes. Hope he doesn't make the same mistake as the Spanish Football Association president made. But he might be forgiven.
Not with that beard.
Right, our fun question, very short one from Oliver on the Wirral. What are you doing for Lent? I think what he really means is, what are you giving up for Lent? Or is there other bits of Lent that I should know about that I know nothing about? James?
I was thinking about this. I was panicking. I mean, as with all great philosophical questions, I'll probably ask my girlfriend what she'd give up.
I apologise. I thought it was a text question. It's actually from a caller. Oliver, would you like to ask the question yourself? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, that's fine. I just went to the Mass for Ash Wednesday, and while the world falls apart, I thought it might fall back on something godly. But yes, that's the question.
Okay,
what are you
thank
doing
you
or
very
not doing
much.
for Lent?
Tracey?
I'm not very good at giving up things. I won't be giving up. I lead a very well-balanced life already, so I'm afraid I won't be giving up anything. I will go to church over Easter, though.
Okay. Natalie?
I gave up alcohol to become an MP, to join Parliament.
Ooh.
I feel like I've completed life. I've absolutely smashed it. 2.5 years sober, and I don't have to give up anything else. I love it.
Tessa?
I'm a drinker. Just out there on the table. And it does worry me having a podcast partner who doesn't drink, but that's just a separate matter. Secondly, I am so concerned about the international aid budget, and given that we've ascertained all of us are middle-ranking earners, I think that all of us should be not giving up something but donating towards something, and that I put that message out to everyone. And I find it really annoying because it means you have to go into your fiddle about, do your research. I wish they'd just take the money off me. But I do think there's a desperate world out there, and we've got more than we realise we have, most of us in this country. Not everyone, but most of us.
Well, if you have liked listening to the dulcet tones of Tessa Dunlop, you can do so much more from next week on the Where Politics Meets History podcast. First episode will, if you subscribe, it will come to your phone automatically on Tuesday morning. Thank you very much to all of you for coming on the show tonight. Monday's panel includes the leader of Plaid Cymru, Reen ap Iorwerth, the businesswoman and fine jewellery designer Kiki McDonough, Conservative MP Rebecca Smith, and the former Labour Policy Director Andrew Fisher. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to return to the subject of one of the questions which our panel have just been talking about. Almost 1 million people in England speak little to no English, causing concerns over migrants' integration. Official statistics show that 10% of residents born overseas struggle with the language. Now, many of you have been pointing out, yeah, but what about Brits who move to Spain? Yeah, they don't make any effort generally to learn the language. That is absolutely right, but that is no excuse for people who come to this country not learning the language here. What are the difficulties you've encountered? And it's difficult to ask people who don't speak English to ring in for obvious reasons. But if you came to this country not being able to speak a word of English, what words of encouragement can you offer to others? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the French president warned the world must be ready if the US chooses not to be on the same side when it comes to Ukraine's war with Russia. In a televised address, Emmanuel Macron announced a planned summit of European army leaders in Paris next week.
The threat we are